Happy Halloween, starlings! I want to preface this video by saying I'm sorry because there was something I really wanted to have done by now that would have been great for Spooky Month, but real life keeps real-lifing, and I decided that I would rather take my time and make the project higher quality than if I'd decided to rush it. But I didn't want to leave y'all hanging, so I had a poll in my Discord server, and the folks there voted that I should tell you all about my favorite ghost story. So sit back, relax, have some candy, and listen as I tell you about a little book called Something Upstairs. So, some of you starlings who have seen my age regression video may recall that I have trauma associated with reading. And I won't be getting into why that is in this video, but I bring this up because I need y'all to understand that Something Upstairs is a young adult story, aka for teenagers, and I don't want any of y'all making fun of that in the comments. Look at it like this. If several adults' favorite book series can be Harry Potter, which is a series entirely for kids, then my favorite book can be one that's meant for teens. Also, let's not talk about J.K. Rowling. I'm aware of that elephant in the room, but that's not where our focus is. I just needed a fitting comparison, so let's just move on.
Now, we don't have time to unpack all of that.
Something Upstairs was written by Avi, and it came out in 1988. And given that ya boy was born in 95, it even surprises me a little bit that this came to be my favorite book. I honestly wouldn't have known about this book if it wasn't for one man, my 5th grade literacy teacher, who I'm going to call Mr. Big Cat. If you're watching this, Mr. Big Cat, I hope you like the nickname. Anyway, going back to my trauma with reading, I'd gotten that well before this grade. So how did this one teacher have such a big influence that made this book my favorite? The answer is so surprising, yet so simple. He read it to me. Not just to me, he read it to the whole class. He spent several class periods just reading chapters of this book. And more than that, this book was not attached to any assignments. This wasn't something we had to do for a grade. This was just something that Mr. Big Cat did for fun to bond with his students. And all of those factors put together, being read to for fun, with no schoolwork tied to it, was just the right formula for this book to become my favorite. Honestly, because of this, I think more teachers should read books to their students regardless of grade. But I digress. You're not here to listen to me talk about how this came to be my favorite. You're here for the contents of the book itself. So let's crack into it. The story starts with our first main character, 12-year-old Kenny Holdorf, as he's just moved to Providence, Rhode Island. He's come all the way from Los Angeles, so he's going through a bit of a culture shock, going from a bustling, high-energy place to a more subdued, historical area. His room is up in the attic, and there's another room next to his, which his father describes as having been the servants' quarters once upon a time. In the middle of that room was a dark stain on the original wood floors, and the stain and that room filled Kenny with a sense of unease, as if he had something to do with it. A few nights later, Kenny heard some noises coming from that eerie room, and when he got up to check it out, he saw a pair of hands coming up from the stain, pushing away a moving box that had been placed on top of it. Once the box was off the stain, the ghost of our second main character, who we later learn is a 16-year-old slave named Caleb, pulled himself up and out of the stain and began feeling along the walls like he was trying to find a way out. When he reached the door and the two met eyes, Kenny held up his shoe like a weapon, and the ghost, surprisingly, reacted in fear, flinching and backing away as if expecting to be hit, until he quickly vanished. Over time, Kenny and Caleb had more meetings in the room. Caleb explained that he was once a slave and that the stain on the floor was his blood, left from when he was murdered. He also explained that because a ghost is an image of what once was, that he is still a slave, trapped and unable to leave the room. Kenny expressed his desire to help Caleb be free, and that he wanted to be friends with Caleb, to which the ghost seemed doubtful, and even a bit scornful at the idea. But he decided to let Kenny try to help, and asked Kenny to help him find his murderer. I'm gonna interrupt the story here just to say if you've listened this far and you'd rather read the book for yourself, please do so. Not only because it's worth a read, but also because I'm about to go into spoiler territory with this book. So if you want to avoid spoilers, feel free to click off of this video now and come back once you've read it, or you can skip to this timestamp to hear my overall thoughts. If you'd rather just hear the rest of it from me, feel free to keep watching. Just keep in mind, my retelling is going to be very abridged and there's a lot of details I'm leaving out for the sake of time. Genuinely, I can't recommend you reading this book on your own enough. Anyway, that's enough of a pause. Let's get back into it. Slightly prior to being asked to find the murderer, Kenny had already been trying to find more information about the bloodstain and the house's history on his own. He'd been getting some help from an old man named Pardon Willinghast, a historian at the nearby library. Kenny asked him a lot of questions about the history of the house, who lived there, who could have owned slaves, etc. And although Willinghast gave Kenny the answers he was looking for, he also encouraged Kenny to stop looking into things so deeply, and that whatever happened there was so long ago he shouldn't need to concern himself with it. One night, however, after talking to Caleb and being asked to find the murderer, Kenny experienced something bizarre. When he went back into his room, it wasn't his room as he knew it. It was hundreds of years ago, back in Caleb's time. Kenny saw a suspicious, shadowed figure out the window, standing in the street. The man raced off, and although Kenny gave chase, he wasn't able to catch up to the mysterious man. So, after exploring Providence a little more, doing side quests and keeping an eye out for the man, Kenny eventually went back to his room, fell asleep, and woke up in his own time. The next time he saw Caleb, Kenny told him about how he'd gone back in time. This seemed to interest Caleb, and for the next few nights, he tried to get Kenny to lead him back to that time again, so that they could work together to prevent Caleb's murder altogether. Now, I say next few nights because, as you can imagine, the idea of what Caleb was suggesting was terrifying to a 12-year-old modern-day kid like Kenny. But after trying a few more times to find information about Caleb's murder in the modern day, he found a newspaper article suggesting that the slave committed suicide. Caleb, however, refuted this, as there was no way he would have been able to shoot himself square in the back. But the one thing from the article that neither of them could figure out is how this could have happened when the door of the room was locked from the inside when Caleb's body was discovered. As such, with no more information to find in the modern day, and determined to help Caleb, Kenny agreed to lead Caleb back in time. And when he did, he was able to see Caleb as he was, alive. The two of them went through Providence in the past and found a meeting of slave traders trying to keep the trade open in spite of the trade about to become against the law. And among the group of traders was a man Kenny recognized, the Shrouded Mystery Man, none other than Pardon Willinghast, who was able to take a keychain from Kenny's pocket and threaten him. Kenny could either do what Willinghast told him to, or, unable to be just as he was when he came back in time, he would never be able to go back to the modern day. Before long, Caleb and Kenny reached a riot that was being staged by drunk pro-slavers, who, I should warn you, use the N-word in the book as it was originally intended, a derogatory term meant to demean slaves, and they used this word directly at Caleb. The mob was able to injure Caleb as well, but Kenny was able to pull him away. However, the group, all riled up, started breaking windows and lighting nearby houses ablaze, which prompted Caleb to fire a musket he'd retrieved into the mob, killing one of them. The rest gave chase, and although Kenny and Caleb were able to get away, Caleb had lost the musket during the chase. With Caleb hurt, the two of them made their way back to the house in the attic. Determined to get Caleb some help, Kenny went off in search of someone while Caleb stayed inside the servants' quarters with the door locked. Outside, he found Willinghast, who told him that if he wanted his keychain so he could return to the present, he would have to kill Caleb, and Willinghast gave him a pistol to do so. When Kenny returned to Caleb, still desperate to help, he told Caleb all about who he saw and what he was told to do. Despite Kenny saying that he wouldn't do what Willinghast said, Caleb didn't fully believe him, but he still came up with an option that would allow himself to live and Kenny to go home. Together, they staged a scene to make it look as if Caleb had been shot, complete with a blood-stained shirt and a bullet fired from the gun. Now, this here's my favorite part, so get this. The whole time, Caleb had been suspicious and mistrustful of Kenny, not really believing that Kenny would ever want to be his friend. After all, in spite of the way I'm telling the story, Kenny has acted pretty cowardly, and with Caleb being a slave, he rightfully has trust issues in regards to white people. But as Caleb is laying there, the stage set to trick Willinghast, weak from being injured and having caught a fever, and with Kenny about to leave so he can bring Willinghast inside, Caleb called out to Kenny one more time. Kenny came closer. Caleb took his hand, looked him in the eyes, and told him, "You are my friend." Finally, Kenny brought Willinghast inside. Willinghast, unfortunately being a smart man, knew that everything he was seeing was a setup. The pistol he gave Kenny still had one more bullet in it, and Willinghast still had the keychain. He made Kenny draw the gun again and ordered him to fire, first calmly, then gradually screaming at Kenny, up until he said, "He means nothing to you." That, more than anything, was the wrong thing to say. The next morning, when Kenny woke up, the stain was no longer in the other room. When he went to check the article about Caleb's death he'd found earlier, he now found an article about the death of Pardon Willinghast, and no such man was working at the library. The article also mentioned that Caleb had escaped from the house and was being searched for. The book ends with Kenny saying that he walks through Providence a lot, just in case Caleb wound up in some other house, hoping that he got to be truly free. And that's it. Like I said, there's a lot of detail in the book that I left out for the sake of time, so if you've gotten to this point and you want to check it out, feel free to do so. As for my thoughts, well, it's my favorite book and my favorite ghost story. Obviously, I love it. The characters, the way the mystery came together, even the aspects of time travel and the prevention of paradoxes were all done beautifully. And I understand there may be some of you who take issue with this book making use of the N-word, but if I may throw in my own 2 cents, I think the fact that it's used and shown in its historical context is a good thing, because it helps to show exactly why it's a word that white people shouldn't use anymore, and how hurtful it can be. In addition to that, I love that this is an anti-racist story that isn't preachy, and the progression of both Caleb and Kenny's understanding of each other feels organic. I don't know about y'all, but when I was growing up, the schools I went to were just shoving anti-racist stories down our throats. And like, don't get me wrong, I understand why they were doing it. I'm just saying that there's only so many times I can watch Remember the Titans and Our Friend Martin before I start going, okay, yeah, I get it, you know? Like, that's what I love about Something Upstairs. It never at any point feels like the characters are just gonna stop what they're doing, talk to the reader directly and say, remember kids, don't be racist. It just feels genuine in its storytelling. And speaking of being genuine in its storytelling, the friendship arc between Kenny and Caleb literally brought tears to my eyes, and it high-key still does, even after having this book for over a decade. The way they come together and Caleb gradually opens his heart to Kenny is just so touching and so sweet, and it's genuinely one of my favorite friendships in fiction. So yeah, 10 out of 10 book. Everyone in the comments thank Mr. Big Cat for reading this to me. Please try to find this book and read it yourself. See if it's at your library. Find an audiobook, a paperback, a digital copy. I don't care, just please read it for yourself. Like, if someone like me with reading trauma can get this excited about a book, you know I'm serious. Like, I'm here just gushing about this the same way Ego Raptor gushes about Mega Man X. So just read the book. It's good. Anyway, yeah, that's all for this video, Starlings. If you liked this video, please be sure to leave a thumbs up and drop a comment. Tell me what your favorite part of the story was, or even if you've read this book before. Talking about books isn't my usual kind of content, but I still want to encourage you to check out my channel if this is the first time you're seeing me. And if you like more of what you see, feel free to hit that subscribe button and consider becoming a stellar supporter by clicking the blue join button. If you want to join my Discord server or follow me on any of my social medias, my link tree will will be down in the description. Check it out. I recently joined Blue Sky, and that's on my Linktree now too. That's all from me. I had a fun time gushing about this, but now this Starboy's gotta blast off. Peace out, and happy Halloween!